Okay, this next assignment is about using what are called the velocity blocks, velocity X and velocity Y, and it's just another way to create motion, but I want you to play with it a little bit. Keep it simple today. You don't have to overcomplicate. Let's do this first. Let's look at the handout that I have for you. You're going to have to create a program that has 4 objects in it that are all moving in a different direction. Now, here's what I mean by a different direction. Work with me here. It's my fake whiteboard. Going from left to right, that's a direction. That would count. Going from, did I say, that's right to left. Okay, yes. Going from right to left, that is a direction. That would count. Going from top to bottom, that would be a different direction. That would count. Going from bottom to top, that would be a different direction. That would count. But now today we'll see a little bit about getting into this idea that moving diagonally from like top left to bottom right, that's a different direction. That would count. And moving from bottom right to top left, that's a different direction. That would count. And then also moving from bottom to top and to the right like that, that would count. And moving from top to bottom in a diagonal direction like this, that would count. So when I say every object has to go a different direction, there's a lot of possibilities. And so I'm going to show you a little bit about how you can create movement in different ways. Go up, down, right, left, diagonal movement. By using this velocity block, you can do it, and you're going to have one program with 4 objects that are all moving in different directions. All right, so let's look at some other things. Let's go back to the handout for a minute. You know, I've got, well, really, I just told you, right? I've got some instructions here, but I'm not going to read that to you. I'll show you what it looks like in the game lab. All right, now let's look. This is not the assignment, but let's look at this first. Let's look at how these blocks work. Okay, I'm going to hit run, and all I've got right now is a little like token thing, a game token that is sitting in the middle and it's not doing anything at all. You can see the code that I used to create that program so far. I just got this token out of the Sprite library, and I created the variable, and I set the animation, and I scaled it a little bit, and I've got a background command and a draw sprites, and that's all it is. It doesn't do a thing yet. All right, so here's what we're going to be working with today. It's going to be these 2 blocks right here, sprite.velocityx and sprite.velocityy. Now, my whole purpose right now is not really to show you the whole 4 objects thing, is just show you how these work. All right. X is, I think it's obvious, isn't it obvious? If you set the X velocity, it's going to have to do with horizontal movement. So I'm just going to bring this over. I want to show you what this does. All right, and I called my thing token, so I'm going to change that. And I'm going to give it a velocity X, and I'll just say 3. All right, now let's reset this, and oh, look. Okay, it's a positive number. It's a positive 3. So it's moving to the right. Velocity X equals 3. So I don't have to do like that counter pattern or anything where I say sprite.x equals sprite.x plus 3. This just, if I say velocity X equals 3, it gives that token, I'm resetting it and running it several times, it gives that token motion on the x-axis to the right. Now I'm going to reset this. I'm going to change that 3 to a -3, and I bet you can guess what's going to happen. If I run it now, it's going to go to the left. Velocity X is set to -3, and so it's going to move to the left. Now, the 3 is determining the speed. If I used a larger number, it would move faster, but I don't want it to move very fast right now. I want you to be able to see it. All right, so that's how this thing works. This velocity X just gives it movement on the x-axis in the factor that you give it. Like, 3 is pretty slow, but you can make it faster. I'm going to pull this out for a second. Let me reset this. And now I think you know what's coming, don't you? If I do a velocity y, and I say, okay, let's give it a velocity of 3 on the y-axis, and I run this, then it's going to fall down the screen. It's going on the y-axis, velocity x, velocity y. Right? And if I switch that, I'm going to reset this program, and I'm going to reset this program. There we go. And if I change that to a -3 instead of a +3, I think you know what's going to happen, right? It's moving up instead of down. Okay. Now, the other thing that can happen here is you can create diagonal motion, right? Maybe what if I'm going to reset the program, what if I switch that velocity y back to 3, and now I bring over also a velocity x. And I'll put that also on 3. All right, so now this token has two different velocities applied to it, right? The program is telling, okay, take that token, and it gets a velocity y of 3, and it also gets a velocity x of 3. And so what happens? Well, let's run it. It goes diagonal because it's a combination of the two. And then when you start playing around with positive and negative numbers, then you get diagonal movement in different directions. It depends on whether your x is positive or negative and whether your y is positive or negative. All right, so here is, let's switch over to this. This is an example of the program that would count for today. This would work. This would work. All right, watch. I'm going to run it. Boom. And you've got those 4 spaceships that are all moving in a different direction. You've got a spaceship that's going left. You've got a spaceship that's going right. You've got a spaceship that's going up. And you've got a spaceship that's going down. Right? And this kind of thing right here would work for today's assignment. Now I'm going to go real quick. I don't know that I'm going to build this whole thing right in front of you, but let's just think it through. Let's just logic it through a little bit. On this one, I actually did use 4 different sprites because I wanted them to look different. I went into they're in the vehicle section, I think, and I went in there and I found all of these, there's black and blue and green and red. They call it red. It looks orange to me. But I got these 4 different vehicles. You could actually make your 4 objects could all look the same if you wanted them to. You could do that. All right. And then in the first part of the program up here, all I'm doing is, I set, okay, this is the black spaceship, setting it up. And here's the blue spaceship. Now for the blue one, I wanted it to be pointed a certain way, so I set its rotation to get it pointed the way I wanted it to be pointed. That would not be required for today's assignment. If you don't want to point something in a certain direction, you wouldn't have to, but I did. I wanted to. All right, here's the setup for my green spaceship. There's the create sprites, the set animation, and again, I had to rotate my green spaceship to make it point the way I wanted it to point. Here's the setup for my red spaceship. Create, and I gave all of these like a beginning location. If you'll look at when I said create sprites, I figured out a starting location for them. And here's my set animation, and I did have to rotate my red one to make it point in the way that I wanted it to point, right? And then once we get down here, it's really not that big of a thing. Just look for a second at the code that is down here in the draw loop. Set the background color, whatever you want. And now for the red one, I said velocity x is 3. Well, it seems like that should make it go to the right. And for the blue one, velocity x is minus 3. That should make it go to the left. For the black one, velocity y is 3. That should make it go down. For the green one, velocity y is negative 3, minus 3. That should make it go up. And it does. If I run this program, that's exactly what happens. I assign these velocities, and they move in that direction. It depends on whether it's an x or a y and whether it's positive or negative. And that's how I got control of those 4 items to make them move the way I wanted them to move. Now, let's look at a different version of this. All right, I'm just going to bring it in, and I'm going to run it. This one is slightly more complicated, but not a ton. All right, so on this one, every one of the spaceships is going diagonal. Right, look at it again. Here it is. All right, one more time. They all kind of start in a corner, and then they fly in a diagonal path, a diagonal manner. So real quick, for each one of the spaceships, it's the same kind of thing. Over here on the animation tab, I got there's my 4 different spaceships that I used. Okay. And I've got the create sprites, and on every create sprite, I was concerned about where they were going to start. So I set an X and a Y for their starting location. and I got them set up to look the way I wanted. Like I want the black one to be the black one, and I had to rotate them to point them the way I wanted. I had to kind of play around with angles, and like on the black one, I had to rotate it at -45 degrees to get it to point the way I wanted. On the blue one, I set it where I wanted it to, or where I wanted it to be, and I rotated it at 45 degrees to get it pointed in the direction that I wanted it to be pointed. On the green one, I set its location to begin with is 20,370, and I rotated it a -135 to get it to be pointed in the way that I wanted it to be pointed. And then on the red one down here, again, just got it in the location that I wanted, and I rotated it 135 degrees to get it to be pointed the direction that I wanted it to go. The rotation stuff is not really required on today's assignment. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. Now, down here, inside the draw loop, in order to make them go diagonal, let's focus in on the black one here for a second. In order to make it go diagonal, it has to have both an x and a y velocity. It's not going to go diagonal with just an x or just a y. You have to have a combination of both if you want diagonal movement. So for the black one, the x is 3 and the y is 3. You can see it right there. And so that created diagonal movement for that black, and that's going to the right and going down. For the blue one, this one's going to be going to the left and going down because the x is negative and the y is positive. And again, the blue spaceship has a velocity x and a velocity y. If you want diagonal movement, you'd have to have both an x and a y. For the green one, it's a 3 and a -3. The x is 3, the y is -3. So it's going to be going to the right, but it's going to be going up. All right, so that's its diagonal movement. And then for the red one, -3 and -3. Okay, so that one, it seems like, is going to be going to the left and going up because of that combination of numbers on the x and the y, velocity x and velocity y. So if I run it a couple more times here, you'll see I get diagonal. And I plotted them back here at the very beginning. I plotted them in the corners so that they could go diagonally from corner to corner. That's what I wanted them to do. Now, all you have to do is you have to have a program where there are 4 moving objects, and like I said, they don't have to all look different. You could make it so all the objects look the same. That would be okay. But they all have to move in a different direction, and you're going to accomplish that by assigning them velocity x or velocity y, or a combination of velocity x and velocity y. And keep in mind, remember that if you take an object and you give it a velocity x and a velocity y, it's going to move diagonally. And how fast it moves and what direction it moves depends on the numbers that you use, how you assign the positives and the negatives and everything that you do to it. Yeah, I'm going to refresh that whole page here. I think it kind of lost its bearings. There we go. All right, so I'm not going to build one right in front of you. I have tried to show you 2 different versions, and this one, I'm not going to lie, this one's a little bit more complicated just because you have to use an x and a y for every one of those objects, but you don't have to make it that complicated. You could do something more like this one over here, where what we've got over here is that I'll reset it and run it, it's just an x and a y, right? Look inside the draw loop. 1, 2, 3, 4. Red has a velocity x, blue has a velocity x, black has a velocity y, and green has a velocity y, and that's it. It's not as big and long as the other one. All right. There will be some help posted on Classroom, like help page and screenshots and all kinds of things to help you. Study up the code. Look at the code. Look at it. Make it make sense in your mind. Work it through. Logic it out. You can do this. All right, so that's today's assignment. 1 program, 4 objects, all moving in a different direction, and you have to use these velocity blocks to make them move. Off you go.